So I am very excited to introduce to you today two wonderful, wonderful additions to our Hartman Institute. We have Mohammad Darawshe, who is a faculty member of the Hartman Institute and also is Director of Planning, Equality, and Shared Society at Givat Chaviva Educational Center. He previously served as co-director of the Abraham Fund initiatives and as elections campaign manager for the Democratic Arab Party and later the United Arab List. Mohammad Darawshe is considered a leading expert on Jewish-Arab relations. He has received many awards and leadership positions, including serving as a member of the National Committee, which drafted Israel's coexistence education policy. We also have with us Tehila Friedman, who's a research fellow here, who holds a master's degree in law from Hebrew University, also a graduate of the Mandel School for Educational Leadership. She is the program director at Shacharit, a think tank promoting a new social partnership between all segments of Israeli society. She has served as the consultant to Minister Natan Sharansky in the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and also as deputy director of the Jewish division of the ADL. She is founder of the Yerushalmit movement, which is a nonprofit for pluralistic Judaism or for pluralistic Jerusalem, and has many other diverse experiences to share with us. They're each going to begin by reflecting on their responses to the nation-state law and engage each other in some dialogue, and then we'll open it up for your questions. So thank you, Mohammed. We'll begin.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Is Daniel here? Daniel? No, he's not here. All right. So I'll speak to him later, because I'm going to argue with him a little bit. But I'm choosing not to give you really lecture type of thing, but more comments of this to make it more of a discussion between me and you, and between me and some of the things that you've heard from Daniel. And I would even dare say try to bring a discussion between you and the Arab community in general, because the nation-state law is seen in very personal lens for every Arab citizen. Although Daniel said, what's the big fuss about it? You know, it's pretty much nothing. It's a lot. Actually, it's everything for us. It's a matter of legitimacy as citizens. It's a matter of equality as citizens. It's a matter of whose state is it? Is it the state of the Jewish people, or is it the state of the Israeli citizens, or the Israeli people? Is there something like that? The first couple of words that Daniel said, and maybe it was by mistake, or maybe it was intentional, he said, I'm here to talk about Israeli nationalism. And the next hour and a half was about Jewish nationalism. And maybe this is the distinction I want to talk about, because with Israeli nationalism, I can find a place. In Jewish nationalism, I don't have a place, because it's purely ethnic, it's purely religious. You have to subscribe to specific religion, you have to be of specific ethnic group, and I'm not sure about DNA tests, but it's very specific, it's very exclusive. When you talk about Jewish nationalism, it's exclusive. I have nothing against it, but I can't be part of it. If you talk about Israeli nationalism, it's not something that is already made. It's probably something in the making or to be made. And there, I want to be a partner. I want to be a partner, not just take it as is, as it's been presented to us. I mean, that's the nation-state law is trying to say, this is Israeli nationalism. It's synonymous to Jewish nationalism. And you, as a minority, you take it as is. You have no role in trying to even draft even one part of it or one word of it. You're just a subject that is not even discussed. So the subtext of the nation-state law is that Arab citizens barely exist. The only time that they mention us is when they mention that Arabic language has a special status. It's Arabic language, it's not the Arab citizens. So as citizens, we might be or not be, regardless, But the language is now even, it's, when you say special status, it's special status in comparison to what? To the day before the 19th of July, where it was an official language of the state. So when there was a mention about the Arab citizens, it is downgrading status. So there are two feelings that come to my mind when I read the nation-state law. One is actually a deep sense of insult, personal insult, collective insult. It's downgrading our status to the point of not even being present when they talk about the nation-state law. So we're not part of the nation. There's no Israeli nation here. The state is determining Israel is not a nation. The Jews are a nation, but there's not going to be a nation in the state of Israel. This project is for something which is ethnic and not something which is civic. So when you speak about, when Daniel says Israel needs to be the state of its citizens, first of all, by the way, all states in the world are the state of their own citizens, except for Israel that says, no, I'm not the state of my citizens. I'm the state of part of my citizens, plus the diaspora Jews. Trying to create a new creature that hasn't been created, by the way, in political science, and I'm a political scientist. This creature of saying you're pure ethnic homeland for only one pure specific ethnic group, this is going in one direction. Racism. It's racism. And it's not only because of what's in it, but it's also of what's not in it, what the authors chose to omit. When you compare it to that, and Daniel did that, when you compare it to the founding document of the state, which is actually the contract between my grandfather's generation and the founding fathers of the state of Israel. There was a contract, and that contract is the Declaration of Independence, which speaks very clearly about equality, social, economic, and political equality. The nation-state law misses social, economic, and political equality. There was another contract signed on the 15th of July, 1948, and that's the surrender agreements of all Arab towns and villages in Israel. And Article 9 there speaks about guarantee political equality in a democratic society. That's a surrender agreement. That's a contract not with the founders of the state. It's because the Declaration of Independence has no legal status, but the surrender agreements have legal status because they were signed by the Israeli government. And they did guarantee the democratic and equal nature of the state of Israel. The word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence, but it does appear in the surrender agreements of the state of Israel. So what the nation-state law does for us, it's breaking contracts. It's breaking the contracts of citizenship based on equality and democracy. That's to start with. Which, in addition to the insult and breaking contract, it's trying to create a two-layer society. Discriminatory society, oppressive in nature, de jure and not only de facto. So de facto, we've experienced being second-class citizens for the last 71 years. We know how to be second-class citizens. Many of us have even internalized second-class citizenship. Many of us are trying to fight that status and trying to stand up straight and say, we're not willing to remain in this kind of second-class citizenship. But this law is trying to come and say, now it is de jure, it's legally your second-class citizen. Which again negates the five, not only one basic law that Daniel mentioned, human dignity, but it negates the five basic additional laws that relate to the democratic nature of the state. A two-layer society is not a democracy. You can create, and I mentioned this, I used this yesterday in the Tiyul, you can create good coexistence between a horse and a rider, and they can both enjoy wonderful ride together, and they can enjoy the view together, and they can drink from the same river, and they can even be very passionate and love each other. So we can have this nice coexistence. But this coexistence usually ends when the horse goes to the barn and eats hay, and when the rider goes to his castle and eats a steak. There you have the hierarchy obvious. I'm not one of those that is willing to play the role of the horse. I don't want to be the rider either, but it's either we're two riders or we're two horses pulling the same wagon. That's the principle of equality. Now the question is, can a Jewish state be equal? And that's what's on the table. Can a Jewish state be equal? So Supreme Court Justice Aharon Barak, when he was asked to comment on this in the Qa'dan versus the State of Israel in the year 2000, when he was analyzing a case in which relates to allocating land for an Arab family, or approving a deal of an Arab family that bought the land in a Jewish town. And the Israel Land Administration said, no, we have to protect the Jewish nature of that town. And he said, this is unconstitutional, mainly for two reasons. He said, this is discriminatory, and a democracy cannot discriminate because the principle has to be equality and respect of the 5 basic laws that guarantee that equality. But then he went further in his analysis and he said, but actually the Jewish nature of the state does allow discrimination in 2 places only. One, in the law of return, which is an immigration law actually, guarantees Jews immediate citizenship the minute they step foot here. And he said a democracy, and Israel does not have to be apologetic that this is undemocratic, because it's not relating to citizens, it's relating to potential citizens. And as such, you can still discriminate and even get away with it by international law. And actually all states do it, including Canada and the US and every other country, and even Brazil. Many countries have immigration laws that limit access and entry, even if it's a single entry, or residency or citizenship for people that were not born as citizens. So Aharon Barak said that can be tolerated easily. The second place, he said that Israel can discriminate because of its Jewish nature. He said in the creation of the public sphere, the public culture. And as such, he used issues of symbols, such as the flag, the national anthem, the Shabbat being the official holiday of the state, the menorah being the official symbol of the state. Basically said, because the Jews are the majority, and as long as they are the majority, they have the right of the majority to be the dominant culture. And to be the dominant culture and express that in the public sphere. Everywhere else, you cannot discriminate. So the minute that Jew that comes from the United States and steps foot in Israel, he gets his welcome package as a Oleh Chadash, but the state has no right to discriminate in his favor any further after he becomes a citizen. Now, what the nation-state law is trying to do is to say, yes, no, you can discriminate in issues such as settlement. What is settlement? What is Jewish settlement? Let me tell you the historic context of Jewish settlement inside Israel. I'm not talking about the West Bank and Gaza. The Jewish settlement in the 1950s and 1960s meant Judaizing the Galilee. Trying to transfer Jewish populations from God knows where to the Galilee, to convince Jews to move to live in the Galilee, to change the demographic balance in favor of the Jewish citizens in the Galilee, because the Arab citizens were a significant majority of that region. And Judaizing the Galilee meant that you encourage Jewish settlements. How do you do that? One, you confiscate Arab land, you nationalize it, and then you privatize it, or you find a way so that it ends up in Jewish hands. You create bypass roads around Arab towns that actually suffocate and limit the development of Arab towns so that they have no capacity to expand in a normal way, because those roads actually close the towns without even exit roads to some of the villages that they pass on their lands. You give privilege to the businesses that want to open in factories in those Jewish towns in order to encourage them to create jobs for those Jewish settlers in the Galilee Jewish towns, to create jobs there, meaning that you give preferential treatment for Jewish settlement over the rest of the Israeli settlements, who happen to be Arab settlements. So when you speak about encouraging Jewish settlement inside Israel, it's nothing but racist. It's nothing but discriminatory based on your ethnic affiliation. It cannot be anything, it can't be seen anything other than that. It means that the state gives the right to the Jewish majority to confiscate the well-being and the future of anyone who's not Jewish in favor of a specific ethnic group. This is racist. So although it's coated and sugar-coated in very nice words that any one of you that can hear say, well, there's no problem with encouraging Jewish settlements. Well, there is a problem with encouraging Jewish settlement. You should encourage Israeli settlement. Israel, maybe it's time that it builds the first Arab town, the first Arab city in its history. Maybe it's time to start building more and more joint towns, which is, by the way, happening despite the policy of Judaization. So if you go to Nazrat Elite, which was built to be a Jewish town, the power of the market, of the property market, is playing its way. 30% of the residents of Nazrat Elite, which is now going to be called Nofa Galil, that's a new name for the city. They decided to change their name in a referendum last week. But 30% of the population is Arab. That's market power. People have buying capacity. They go and they buy houses. Now, is this legitimate or not legitimate? Well, this negates the concept of Jewish settlement because Nazrat Elite was meant to be Jewish. So are all those Arab citizens that are buying houses there, are they breaking the law? Actually, yes. We're breaking the law of the nation state law because we are challenging the national intention for Jewish settlement and we're making it Israeli settlement. We're making Nazrat Elite an Israeli settlement, which is exactly what Afula, which Daniel mentioned, is trying to fight. Now, the absurd part of Afula is that they have a fantastic hospital in the region, probably the best hospital in the region, and almost 50% of the staff of that hospital is Arab. 50% of the doctors in a Jewish town, 50% of the doctors are Arab, and about 60% of the nurses are Arab. Now, those same doctors work in a hospital. Across the hospital, there is a park, the public park. So in the summer now, when the city passed this legislation that only residents of the town can use the public parks, and in the weekends, only residents can use the public parks, those doctors that work in Afula cannot cross the street and eat their lunch sandwich only because the city wants to maintain its Jewish identity. A couple of more comments because I had this sign of 5 minutes, which is going to put me in some kind of nervous situation because I'm not even, I have like 9 hours of comments here. I want to talk about the big picture, and the big picture is that can Israel be both Jewish and democratic? Can the Arab citizens accept the Jewish and democratic nature of the State of Israel? So if you come and say that the Jewish nature of the State of Israel is in line with what Aharon Barak said, that Israel serves as the Jewish homeland of the Jewish people, meaning Jews can come here and seek refuge any time, I have no problem with that. Not only that, I'm happy that some of my taxes will be used for that. And I'm happy that this continues and remains to be constitutional part of the nature of the State of Israel. I'm not doing you any favors. Because yes, I do think that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. But it's not only the homeland of the Jewish people. It's also my homeland. And I don't want any favors from you. My presence here as a legitimate, equal citizen is no favor from you. We're an indigenous population. My family has lived in the same village for 800 years. My kids are 28th generation. In my breakfast this morning, I had something called mankushi. Do you know what it is? You probably know it as pita with zatar. But in Arabic, it's called mankushi. And it has 4 ingredients. It has dough, which is baked. It has the thyme spice, that's the zatar. It has sesame, roasted sesame. And it has olive oil. And the olive oil that we used was olive oil that comes from my own fields. I inherited 64 trees, 64 olive trees, planted almost 450 years ago. Each one of those 64 trees has a name. My favorite one is called Meta. That's the name of one of my old ancestors, a woman named Meta. And when I eat that olive oil, for me, it's connection with my homeland. It's not olive oil. It's connection with my homeland. I am home. I'm in my homeland. The question, is this my country? So that's why most Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel, when asked, would you move to live in a Palestinian state when or if it will be established? Our answer is no. We're home. We're in our homeland. Our problem is not, we're not strangers, and that was this is one of the old arguments, 30-some-year-old argument with Daniel. Today he made a revelation that he understood that I'm not a stranger and I'm not a goy. I'm not your goy. This is my home, and the question is, can we make it my country? So the nation-state law is trying to dance in the opposite direction. Actually, it's trying to tilt the floor. So it's not an even floor on which we can both dance on. That's what it does. The last comment, it's not about the facts of the law. And that's why I'm not reading the text of the law. It's about the impact of the law. So Afula mayor, who on Friday was in a demonstration against Arab citizens buying houses in Afula. And by the way, the Arab citizens are buying houses in Afula because they opened a new train station there. And people that want to be close home, close to Nazareth or close to the villages around and want to work in Haifa, they can commute easily. It's for a very practical thing, not because Afula is such a wonderful place to live in. But it's not, she says. And I live about 10 kilometers away from it, and I agree with you. But technically, it's an easy access to Haifa and still allows you to be close to home and allows you to send your kids to Arab schools in the nearby villages. So technically, it's a good place to live in from a technical point of view. It's easily accessible. But the mayor of Afula, when asked, why are you so racist? And he says, no, I'm not racist. I'm implementing the spirit of the nation-state law. And he's right. He's absolutely right. That's what the nation-state law says. Ethnic preference, hierarchy. Ethnic preference and hierarchy. That's what the nation-state law. And its trickle-down effect, it's what's going to scare me. I'll give you, and I will shut up with that. I had a big fight 20 years ago with the Board of Higher Education in Israel about the tests for entering university. And they had something called psychometric exam, similar to the SAT exam. Here we do it out of 800. In the US, it's out of 2,400 points. And Arab kids were failing exams. One, because the exams were taken in Hebrew. And that caused a loss of about 150 points out of 800 if you take the exam in Hebrew. And second, because it's culturally tilted. So they ask you about music that Jews hear in Israel, and not about music that Arabs hear in Israel. There's a cultural bias built in many of the questions. And we fought a battle that this exam has to be also available in Arabic, because it's in order to examine your intellectual capacity to study academic courses. It's not to test your knowledge in music and your knowledge of Hebrew. For that, have another exam. But if you want to investigate the capacity of that person, intellectual capacity to have academic studies, then give them the best case scenario of being able to be tested and measure their intellect, their intellectual level. And yes, we won that battle. We even had to threaten by going to the Supreme Court. Luckily, they realized they're going to lose in the Supreme Court, because Arabic did have an official status as equal language. And since then, Arab students are actually gaining about 150 more points in their exam, which makes them more credible and qualified to enter universities. And this is the main reason behind the boom in university access and an increase in the number of Arab students in Israeli universities, which in 2003 was only 3.5% of the student population. Today, it's 17.8% of the student population in Israeli universities. So downgrading the status of Arabic language means that the schools can maybe the law says you cannot change what's already present in the status of Arabic language, but now they can create a new interview in Hebrew, for example, which is not past practice, it's a future practice. So you'll do a 15-minute interview in Hebrew, which most Arab students will fail. While the practice of universities over the last academic few years has been, okay, we'll recognize your quality of Hebrew, and they force Arab students to take extra 4 hours in the first semester. You will not be able to pass to the second year unless you qualify to higher status of Hebrew. So you have the first year to close the gap of your Hebrew skills, but it's not preventing you from being able to polish your intellectual capacity and access academic studies in Israel. So the trickle-down effect of the nation-state law is more incidents like Afula, but also more creative ideas of how to start creating obstacles in front of Arab citizens to go into maybe civil service will become a test in your Hebrew level. Okay? And the question is what level? Today, for example, you cannot go to university at the Technion unless you have 120 in your Hebrew grade out of 150. And it was 100, the grade of 100 out of 150 only 2 years ago, and then they increased it to 113, and for this academic year, it has to be 120. How many Arab students have that level? Not many. So this academic year, which is ending now, when for the Technion, the number of Arab students that got accepted because of their intellectual capacity to study engineering in the Technion, it was 33%. 800 out of the 2,400 students accepted to the Technion this academic year were Arab. 800. Now increasing the Hebrew bar from 113 to 120, God knows what this will do. But now they have the de jure, the legal backing to do those kind of things, because Arabic is not on the table. So I only touched on 3 issues. One is, I would call it the emotional insult sense of the nation-state law. The second is the discriminatory nature of it when it comes to settlement, the exclusive nature of settlement. And the third is the potential impact, the trickle-down effect, and how people will start using it as a discriminatory tool, because it does allow the hierarchy in status between different citizens. Thank you.
Last week, I sat in some discussion. Last year, Is it better now? Okay. Last week I sat in some discussion about, I don't know if any of you heard about Micha Goodman. So Micha Goodman's new book, it was a discussion about the roots of Jewish secularism, and is it a legit or not legit interpretation of Judaism, something like that. Near me sat a woman, which I adore. Her name is Shirin Khafi. She's Arabic. She's a school principal, you know Shirin? From Lod. And so I whisper and I asked her, how do you feel about this discussion? It was so, internally Jewish, and we were all very emotional. And she said, actually, I'm very relieved. So I said, relief? And she said, yes, because every time you describe us as your problem. Now, I must say, I feel that I'm the least of your problem, and you are lucky to have us, otherwise you would kill each other. So, I laugh. And I must say, there is something in what she said. Because I want to take the very uncomfortable role here and to try to defend a little bit about on the law, though I want to say the bottom line is I think it should be rewrite. It should be, we should add equality for all citizens into the law, okay? It is broken and we should fix it. Had I been a Knesset member, which I tried to be, I was running to Knesset, to this Knesset as part of the Kahol Lavan party, and I didn't make it in. So had I been a Knesset member, I would vote for changing it. And yet, I want to say a few words for the law, okay? And I want to start by giving context. The name Aaron Barak was mentioned here a few times, and rightly so. Aaron Barak, the Supreme Judge, the scholar, is the leader of what he called the constitutional revolution in Israel. And some people call him a constitutional pirate. What happened is that in the year of 92, the Knesset passed this basic law of human dignity, and it was passed not in a big ceremony or something. Like 32 Knesset members vote for. It was the middle of the night. I can't remember how many voted against, but it wasn't part of a very big public discussion. Now, the Supreme Court back then used it as the Bill of Rights for Israel. Finally, we have Bill of Rights for individual rights. The court read into it, for example, the right for equality, though it wasn't there. Why, by the way, it wasn't there? As Daniel mentioned before, not so much because the Arabs, more because of the women. Because of gender equality. Religious parties were afraid, and I'm Orthodox if someone didn't see, and still that's the truth, that religious parties were against adding equality because they were afraid that all the laws around marriage and divorce, which are, the system in Israel is that you can get married or divorce only according to your religious system. Okay, Muslim in Muslim courts and Jews in Batei Din, in Jewish rabbinical courts. And those are not really equal toward women. So they wanted to protect those laws. That's why they didn't let equality be in. But nevertheless, the court read equality into it or interpreted specific laws or cases as if equality was in. That's one example. There are others. And people felt that this balance between individual rights and collective rights went big time to, much more weight were given to individual rights. Leave aside, I'm not talking nationally right now. I'm talking the tension between individuals versus collective, okay? Now, I want to give example. Can Israel protect Jewish majority? Okay? We often speak about the tension between democracy and democratic state and Jewish state, but we tend to forget that the whole system is based on Israel is Jewish because it's democratic, and vice versa. I mean, the only reason for Israel to be Jewish is because there was a Jewish majority, and that's a fulfillment of our rights to national self-expression, but it's based on majority, of having majority. If we don't have majority, it becomes, in a moment, illegit, okay? So can we protect this majority, and how? Now, there was a case about, we have this issue of illegal, depends, refugees / worker immigrants / illegal comers? How do you say? I don't know.
Incomers.
Illegal incomers. So every expression I would use is political. So and we call it in different names. Depends what's our political view. So is that a legit thing to say that Israel can't accept more than X or Y immigrants / refugees / because we want to keep our Jewish majority? Not simple, because if the only thing which is protected by the Israeli system is individual rights, you should show that someone's individual right is, hurted in order for the court to protect it. That's what courts do. So the people who brought this national state law wanted to give the court a tool, or actually to force the court to protect collective rights, not only individual rights. Okay? Because they felt that the balance is not balanced anymore. Because they felt that the dance that Danielle so beautifully described before stopped. That Israel went big time to the liberal side. Now, I remind you, we're talking about the 90s, okay? The days of the Oslo agreements, the days of globalization, okay? International globalization. It's not, they were not imagining, okay? Those were days when Israel really became much more liberal than it was before. Now, this law is being, back and forth for 10 years now. 10 years. It started 10 years ago, and it passed last year. And the reason I'm mentioning that, because I want you to feel that it's a reaction, actually. People who are for this law said, we are only trying to balance again what Aaron Barak and his people kidnapped, okay? They took Israel big time to the liberal side, and we are trying to balance it. We know, they describe it as the Rambam say, if you are here, take it to there, and then it will be, okay? So that's what they're trying to do. Is that good? No. I said, I think the damage is horrible. I hear Muhammad pain, and it's like, and I identify with it. And yet, I want to say it's not like the people of darkness against the people of light, okay? It's not it. I want to remind you that the entire world is now, that liberalism is in a crisis, not only in Israel, okay? In your countries, if I may be not polite, there is a huge crisis. There is a huge war against liberalism. Now, when there is such a crisis, it's one thing to say, oh, those people are all, you know, or stupid, or mad, or, I don't know. I think we should be sincere enough to look at it and ask ourselves what caused this war, when it came from, why? Okay? Why people are voting for leaders who are populist and who are not liberal, very unliberal. There are reasons for that. And the reasons has to do first with the fact that the world is going through the major wave of immigration since World War II. We are in the midst of massive waves of immigration. Now, is that the right way to the West to protect itself? And what's happening now is that the West is trying to protect itself, okay? People want to live in a safe, national countries, not safe in terms of security, not only safe in terms of security, but also safe in terms of identity. People said, we created this land because we want to have one place in the world that we are not, that our culture is the culture in the public sphere. And we want to be able to protect it. Now, I'm not saying that, again, I remind you, I think the law should be fixed, okay? Should be different. And yet, I think it's important to understand what's causing it, because safety is not only about defending yourself from terror. Safety is about the natural willingness to live in a place you feel home, like you described so beautifully. Now, for example, I'm Jerusalemite, and I actually love living in a place which is extremely heterogeneous. I think aside of New York, I don't know a place which is more heterogeneous than Jerusalem. It's working better in New York, it's easier in New York, because here it's a different kind of heterogeneous. But actually, I love it, okay? I love the fact that we live here, a mix of people from different backgrounds, different walks of life. But is it easy? Do I feel always safe? No. Do I feel safe as feminist living in a city which 22% of it are ultra-Orthodox, which think that, you know, my voice is, I can sing in a public sphere? Is that, you know, we tend to say celebrating diversity, so nice. Celebrating diversity. You bring your falafel, I'll bring my whatever. Oh, come on. We're talking about deep diversity here. Big diversity, you know, threatening one. It's not easy. So what I'm trying to say is that I feel that what we see now in Israel is the local version of what you see all around the world, okay, of the crisis of liberalism, because the feeling of people that globalization and liberal values protect them as individuals, but don't protect them as communities, and don't protect their culture. And they are not only individuals. We are not only individuals. You know, this imagination that we are picking, like we are born naked, and then we're picking our faith, we're picking our values, we're picking our... No, we're not. I'm born all of us, we are born into a language. We are born into a set of values. Sometimes we will choose to, to leave our community and to take other set of values, but those values and this language and this tradition is holy to us, is dear to us. And it's legit to want to protect it. It's legit. I'll give you it. I'm Orthodox, and I'm choosing to raise my kids in a very mixed environment. And many times I'm asking myself, am I taking the risk? Or what, how high is the risk I'm taking of them choosing not to continue to keep Shabbat, for example? It would break my heart. It would break my heart. I'm telling you, sincerely. I'm very pluralistic. My kids, I want them to keep, So this balance between building walls and protecting your community and your culture. Okay? I'm choosing not to do it, but I understand people who choose differently. I understand people who say, I want to live in a homogeneous place. I want my kids to be exposed to people more or less like them. Now, most of the people do that. Sometimes they do it by choosing a very expensive place to live in. That would ensure that you would live between people like yourself. A gated community. I can give you, it's not about them, those people, the conservative, small c, who want, to protect. No, most of us do that, okay? Think to yourself how many of you have close friends who voted the opposite from you. Close friends. Not so many. Not so many. Okay? Meaning, you live among people like yourself. And I don't blame you for that, because you have values that are dear for you. So what I'm trying to say that this law is not positive expression of reaction toward something that people felt was unbalanced. First. Second, that this is the local version of international crisis. And third, it doesn't mean that Israel become a racist place. It doesn't mean that. How do I know? Because we have trends toward two opposite directions at the same time, okay? At the same time, everything that Muhammad said is true. He didn't make up anything. And the, not fears, but the concerns he raised, I identify with. But you also would agree, I guess, that at the same time that those things happened, the same government that passed this law is the same government that decided to invest, what was it? 15 million?
15 billion.
15 billion shekels in infrastructure for Arabs, cities, villages, schools. Same government. Sometimes I think they did it like they put the money and they were afraid to be too liberal, so they passed the law. It's like they're doing the right things, and the narrative and talk is the opposite. I don't understand that, but it's happening at the same time. At the same time, you are talking about, what's going to happen with higher education. Only yesterday, I think, they announced that the new chairperson for the central bank, Israeli bank, which is, I think, the highest position in the finance world in Israel, going to be Arab. He wasn't chosen because he's Arab. He was chosen because I guess he's excellent. I know nothing about it. But so it's happening at the same time. We have trends toward two different directions. Now, I'm emphasizing that not in order to defend Israel, but because I feel many times people tend to kind of give up, say, okay, Israel is taking the wrong direction, I'm giving up on it. And I want to say, no, we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis. But there are many people who are willing to fight for democracy in Israel, who are willing to fight for liberal values in Israel, and they are not only the seculars, and they are not only, the usual suspects, they are not only even the leftists. I'm coming from a central party, but I think the majority of Israelis are looking for the right balance. And my last sentence is going to be, look, you need to bear in your minds the very simple fact that we are not our government, just like you are not your government.
So, you want to say it? Well, the deal that we played is that we'll comment for 2-3 minutes on each other, and then we open it, right?
I also was going to invite you to each ask one another a question if you want to pose a question to one another. I also want to suggest when we open up after they engage in a little bit of dialogue, when we open up to Q&A, I want to suggest that we start our first round with those of you who have not yet had an opportunity to pose a question during this meeting. So for those who have not yet, many are readily prepared with questions, and they are often the same people. So just try, if you have not yet had that opportunity, think about your question now, and I'll start round one with you.
Okay. I'm going to respond with 4 points. 2 of them are factual, and 2 are more philosophical. Okay. Factually, the 922 government plan to invest 15 billion shekels in the Arab community was passed in December 2015, and it's supposed to be a 5-year plan. So we are already 3.5 years into the plan. Out of the 15 billion, 4.9 have been invested. And we are 3.5 years in the 5-year plan. So with this speed, we're probably not going to reach 50% of the goal. So decision is one thing, implementation is another thing. So maybe that closes the gap of your confusion about how can the same government make such a wonderful decision and at the same time make such a bad legislation. Because decisions you can choose not to implement. And that's what actually they're doing. They're not doing proper implementation. Yet that doesn't take from the good processes that are happening, such as the appointment of my friend Samer Haj Yahya as the chairman of Bank Leumi, Israel's biggest bank, which is the power of the market, the power of the economy. Israel's economy is much better to the Arab citizens than Israel's government. Israel's society and the Israeli Jewish public is much better than the Israeli government. There's a gap in between, and I think that the Israeli government is trying to also listen to the needs of the market and ease up a little bit some of its restrictions on the Arab citizens to allow the prosperity for Israel's larger interest. Not just the Jewish interest, but the largest interest such as Israel's economy. Israel does need today more Arab students that study engineering at the Technion, and that's why they're all beginning to reduce the obstacles in front of Arab students, because you need to tap into the intellect of the Arab community. For us, this is also an interest, so you have a mutual interest that works very beautifully together. So that's one fact that I wanted to mention. The other fact is that is an issue about time frame. The nation-state law did not pass overnight. It wasn't just something that happened within a week or within a month. It was being discussed for 8 years. The first bill that was presented by Avi Dichter was in 2011, and they had a lot of time to think it and rethinking. It was a premeditated murder of Israel's equal nature. It was premeditated. It didn't happen overnight. It's not stealing a vote. It's not stealing a moment. But it was well planned, thoroughly planned, and went through different variations, They skipped some things out of it, mostly in order to guarantee the majority of it, not because they were being nice, but because they knew that beyond that it will go straight into Supreme Court completely kicking it out, or negating international law, or creating more of a problem for Israel in the international community. But it was a premeditated murder of Israel's equal nature. The two more philosophical points I wanted to mention. One, you argued about the rights for the majority to formulate collective rights. Actually, my field of research is national minorities. And national minorities can happen only in nation states. It's not, the US does not have national minorities because you're not a nation state. France doesn't have national minorities because it's a republic, that everyone is French, it's more of a culture, and it's not ethnic affiliation. Only in nation states where the ethnic aspect of it is the dominant factor of the national identity of the state, that's where you have national minorities. So the concept of self-determination for national groups is not new. Jews didn't invent it. It was invented in the 18th century and slowly started implementing itself in the 19th century. But the concept of nation states met two problems in modern history. One problem is democracy, because when they thought about it, none of those countries were democracies. So they could actually implement racist policies and they could get away with it, i.e. Germany during its Nazi period, and even before that with its less Nazi period but racist approaches, and Poland and many, many other countries afterwards. But the second challenge that nation states met was the minorities among their midst, what to do with them. Now Europe, which is the mother, the cradle of nation states, figured it out. And the way they figured it out is what? One is a constitution, the protection of individual rights, complete protection of individual rights, and equality in front of law, which is also in liberal democracies such as the US. But the second correction they made is that while you recognize the right of the majority to be collective, you recognize the right of the minority to be collective. You can't just give that right of a collective to the majority and say to everyone else, you're individuals. It goes two ways, and that's what Europe did correct. And in Europe today, there are 23 officially recognized national minorities, and some are in the process of being recognized as national minorities, including now a discussion in Switzerland about recognizing the Jews as a national minority in Switzerland. Although many of the Jews are not indigenous populations, because usually the term national minorities is associated with an indigenous minority, not a migrant population. But there's a lot of debate about this in Europe, but they found the corrective clause for it. When you recognize the right of the majority, you need to recognize that those that are not part of the majority, give them their collective rights. So one, it's to protect them. So there's something called, and that's your reading material for tonight, it's called the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, which is part of the Council of Europe. And it spells it out in very, very clear detail. So I'm not against the nation state of the Jewish people, but that's half of the job. To complete the job, you need to recognize the collective rights of the Arab citizens as an ethnic national minority subgroup, which does not challenge the homogeneous nature of the state, the dominance culture of the state, the dominant culture of the state, the right to protect the interests of the collective majority in the state. You know what? Keep the flag, keep the national anthem, keep the law of return. But what if my son falls in love with someone in Europe or someone in the US and they want to naturalize them as Israeli citizens? Should the Jewish collective right of the law of return and the immigration laws prevent my individual right to do that? For my son to choose not to marry that person in order to protect the Jewish majority in the state? We're not the guardians of the Jewish majority. By the way, we're doing a very good job in having lower birth rate right now than that of the Jews. The birth rate of the Arab citizens is going lower and lower all the time. Now it's at 3.1%, while in the Jewish community, it is 3.2%.
It's the other side of having students. It's because women have.
So thank you for our education. So if you want to guarantee, Arab citizens demographic shrinking, give scholarships to Arab students. Be generous, especially to women. Especially to women. And this way you guarantee less children per woman. Which actually is bringing me to the biggest argument I want to make, and actually it connects to the question of the lady that spoke about her family that is afraid. The lady that there who's not looking now is looking at me. And you expressed a lot of fear of losing the majority. One, there's a trick that you can do at night. I'm not going to talk about it. If you want to have more babies. And we made the choice of having less babies because we're choosing modernization. In the Haredi community, they're choosing an opposite direction. And they're actually making sure that in 2050, according to the Israeli Bureau of Statistics, the percentage of the Arab citizens is actually going to shrink to 18% of the population from 21% of the population, mainly because of the Haredi. The ones that are going to shrink with us also are the non-religious secular population of Israel. Yeah. So we're not here to protect the secular Jews. This is, we're not going to increase our birth rate in order to do that. But ultimately, I take issue with even expressing that fear of losing majority. It's me that should be afraid. I'm the minority. Fear should be my asset, not your asset. I should be afraid also of another thing, integration. Integration meaning assimilation. My daughter studies at Tel Aviv University. She's coming less and less at the weekends because she's beginning to live the life of Tel Aviv. It should be my fear. I should be the one that might lose their identity and culture and seek protection because you are the majority. The majority has no right to be afraid of processes of assimilation, of processes of intermarriage, of processes of joint school systems and so on. And suddenly, the Jews who are the majority in Israel are holding the ticket of being afraid all the time. You don't deserve to be afraid when you're the majority. You can't be both the majority and afraid of assimilation, for example. It's a combination of two things that contradict each other. The last point I want to mention actually takes me back to reading I did in preparation for this session. I read an article of Zev Jabotinsky. The title of the article was called Kir HaBarzel, the Iron Wall. And it's a long article, I'm not going to quote it, but I'm going to use one sentence out of it. He said that in Israel we should have Shivyon Nefesh Adiv. Adiv meaning kind. Shivyon Nefesh, it's the equality of the heart or the soul, but kind, do it in kindness. I don't see kindness in the Declaration of Independence. That invites me to want to be a fellow partner citizen. When I was a kid, when we were reading the civics and history books that we were taught in Israeli educational system, they told us that Arab citizens in Israel are supposed to become the bridge for peace between Israel and the Arab world. But someone forgot to mention that to be a bridge, you need to have strong foundations on two sides. The nation-state law is cutting the Israeli foundation, which means I cannot serve as a bridge. The second statement that Jabotinsky made, he said, כל עם רואה בארצו את ביתו הלאומי. Every nation see in their land as their national homeland. And the question is, can I see in Israel as my national homeland also as well? What does it take for that to happen? Either I change my national identity, or the state develops an inclusive national identity, and not just an exclusive national identity. Can the Jewish state, can it mature to be an Israeli state? Or are we going to maintain that shrinking nature of that democratic suit only to fit your measures? I'm going to stop here.
Okay, so I'm going to be brief because I want to leave you time for questions. First, there are collective rights for Arabs in Israel. It's not black and white. We spoke about it outside. The right to have education, separate system of education in Arabic, that's a collective right. The right not to go to the army. You know, every Israeli citizen, leave aside the story of the mess we have with ultra-Orthodox, but every Israeli citizen is obligated to do an Arabic service. The Arabs as a collective are not. The right, I mean, you are the expert. What I'm trying to say, it's not that the situation is good, but it's not black and white. It's not either zero collective rights or full. We're somewhere in the middle, okay? That's one. Second, when you speak about majority and minority, look, you can look at the Middle East and say, hey, come on, you are a huge majority, you the Arabs. And we're a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. So every time, you know, you can manipulate the question of majority and minority. I'm not trying to say that we're not the majority. We are the majority. And we need to stop to be afraid. You are right. And yet, the willingness to keep this majority, I think it's a legit willingness. Not everything, we can't do everything for that, but as a wish, I mean, as a purpose, I think it's legit. Europe, it's very nice to describe Europe as a peaceful solution for, you know, minority rights. I want to remind you what's happening in Europe today. The Brexit is a reaction to something. What's happening in Hungary, in Poland, in France? France is different because France is different kind of mess. But what I'm trying to say is that Europe took it all the way to one side, and now comes a reaction, big time, to the other side, and frightening one. You know, the rise of the far right in Europe, the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of Islamophobia, the rise of, you know, all the good old Europe came back.
But you're mixing here the issue of national indigenous minorities with migrant populations. All what you described about the bad aspect of Europe is dealing with migrants and how they respond to migrants. And I think this is missing the point. I'm talking about indigenous populations. That Brexit is a response to migrants.
I understand what
Hungary
you're saying.
is a response to migrants.
I agree. I also agree. But what I'm trying to say that the thought that we can take liberal equality and liberal values and live happily ever after, it doesn't work. I mean, it's not balanced in Europe in a frightening way. And Europe is looking for a new balance, and I'm afraid of Israel going to the same direction. To some extent, it is going. When I see our Prime Minister with his good friend Orban, it's heartbreaking for me. It's heartbreaking. It's horrible. But I'm not saying we're going to good direction. I'm saying we're part of something bigger. And you need to look at the bigger picture and to think what's the right balance. Because it's not useful to say it was great, you know, the way Europe was before is great. It's not stable. We see. And we're going to have elections again in 2 months. I think the chances. Look, I'm optimistic. Otherwise, I wouldn't even try to go to the Knesset. You know, I wouldn't be in this business. But I think the chances to change this law are pretty high. It was passed by 61 versus 55, 62, I think,
63.
versus 63 versus 55, and 2 abstain. So I think we can create a change. I think we can. I don't think it's done deal at all. So you know, we need to wait and see. But it's not over.
Let's start round one with people who have not yet asked a question this week. Let's take these 3 questions. We've been working on here. Several questions.
And last, this is really last because I forgot. When we speak about Palestinian state, we also speak about national Palestinian state. So people who are for the 2 states solution are for 2 national. I mean, it doesn't make sense to say Israel going to be a whole state, a country, while Palestine going to be a national Palestinian state. Okay, we're talking about 2 national state solution, and both of it going to have minorities from the other side. So, you know, that's also part of the bigger picture.
Jeff Halbrecht from San Francisco. Thank you both so much. I have a question harking back to what Danielle really spoke about and tying that into what you both spoke about. I got the impression that Danielle was really saying that there's self-interest and then there's goodwill. And that at the end of the day, for 2 people to get together and talk, goodwill maybe turn out to be the most important, which is, you know, goes to my question. I heard you say perhaps the issue that most bothered you about this law was the insult of it, which really means that emotional aspects of this are super important. And that the dance that Danielle talked about, it always usually takes 2 people to dance. So the question is, what could the Palestinian Arab population do potentially that would demonstrate some goodwill? Because I don't think, even though there's a power dynamic difference between a majority and minority, when it comes to 2 people talking, goodwill is not really a power dynamic. That takes both parties to demonstrate some sort of goodwill.
Thank you. Jan Kalish from Chicago. When you commented about government versus people, both in our country and in the United States and in Israel, I just want to take a moment to ask Mohammad if you could comment on the literally dozens of NGOs, civil society organizations that fought that nation-state bill before, during, and after, so that those that don't know, the kinds of people on the ground that are working every day to make Israel a better place, because it's really quite the struggle.
Let's take one more. And then...
Yeah.
Alan Leifer from Boston. One of the contexts that you gave us for why this law is passed now is to rebalance back from the individualism and the perceived Supreme Court going too far. To what extent is it also, or do you see things about the controversy over the right of return, the controversy and the decline on both populations for support for a 2-state solution and going to 1-state solution? Is that at all part of the context for passing a law like this?
I'm going to touch on the two questions that I relate to, and then you're welcome to touch on the three if you want. I think that yes, I do agree. It takes two to tango, and there's a lot on the shoulders of the Arab community. And what's mainly on the shoulders of the Arab community is to develop the sense of modesty of a minority. I think that's a sense that we have not perfected yet. We do maybe use the rhetoric of the regional majority that you're afraid of, and have not calmed the fear of the Jews in Israel that, in a way we are with them in the Israeli project and not part of a regional scary project for them. And I think that we need to take actions that lead into this direction. And I think that the strategy has to be engagement. How do we engage in social partnerships, educational partnerships, business partnerships, engage in daily life, in person-to-person interaction. And the more we do that, the more we show the engaging face and the engaging capacity, or even the engaging potential of the Arab citizens in being in this together for forever. We're in this country forever. We're not here fighting you this battle because we will win the war at the end 500 years down the road. And I think that we're not doing enough of that. And I think this can work better the more we break the segregation structures that exist, whether it is in residential reality or within educational reality or economic present segregated realities. Politically, I think that we also need to show higher level of engagement. The retreat that is developing in the Arab community in elections, less and less Arab citizens are voting, is showing that the Arabs are walking out of the political system instead of holding on and say, we are in it until the last soul. We're going to continue fighting the democratic battle. We're not going to choose outside arenas. We're not going to go to the international court. We're going to go to the Israeli court. We're not going to complain to the UN and the US and the EU. We're going to complain to, once again, try to create that majority with the center left to try to get rid of this law politically in the Knesset, in an Israeli majority, and not by embarrassing Israel in front of the world. The second point is about your question, Jane, about the NGOs in Israel. I mean, that's the light. It wasn't in a tunnel, because it was, as you said, 53 versus 64, so it was a massive capacity, not critical mass. It was fighting that dark cloud which lasted for the 8 years since Avi Dichter tried to pass the law in 2011. But unfortunately, those organizations trying to find it, whether it's the Association of Civil Rights, we failed. This cloud has made landfall. It's on us right now. And it's not over for two reasons. It's not over because one, the law is being challenged by 18 different appeals in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court hasn't said its word. They're deferring discussing the law because of the elections. They were supposed to start discussing it on the 27th of February, and they kept pushing it every time before the elections, of the April elections, then until we form a government. Now we have new elections, and they're trying not to intervene in the elections, and they think that making a decision or even discussing the law in the Supreme Court might be seen as an intervention. And this process, these 18 different appeals are mostly led by civil society organizations. And luckily, I must say, some of them are from the right wing. So it's not, the members of the Knesset that voted on it, they claim to be representing the right wing. No, they're representing the extreme right wing. they're not representing the right-wing ideology. I really don't have much problem with Jewish nationalism also, as long as it's not discriminatory nationalism. And there are many, I would even say most Israeli Jewish nationalists, even from the right wing, I can really live with them very well. I can live with them very well, as long as they accept the principle of equality. For me, someone that thinks that the nation-state law should stay is not welcome to my house, even if he's leftist. Even if he thinks he's the most liberal and most wonderful person and believes in everything, but wants to maintain this extra power for his ethnic identity. For me, it's the insult. It's you're trying to demean me and you're trying to put me down, and then you want to be my friend? No, thank you. So yes, we'll do business together, fine. But does that create the foundation for shared society? No, it does not create the foundation for shared society.
To your question, look, obviously it has a connection. When everything is moving to the right, it's connected. Though intellectually, it conflicts. I mean, this law is built on the assumption of another national state near Israel, kind of. And the people who are for one state solution, I mean, it doesn't, so I can't really explain it, but because I don't understand them. But people who are for it, for this law, and for one state solution, they are the one who are threatening our Jewish majority. So, yeah, intellectually, that I don't understand that. So, sociologically, those are the same people. How it works together, you need to ask them, because I really don't understand that.
I know we would like to have many more hours with them, and I hope they'll stay to lunch. We'll ask questions. Just because we have 1 minute, I'll take the prerogative of asking one final question, which is, where do you see hope? Where do you draw hope? What gives you hope for the future?
That's an easy one, I think. What you describe about Israeli civil society, extremely active in general. Specifically, when I look on feminism, which is getting broader and broader in Israel, and you can find Orthodox feminism, that gives me a lot of hope. Why? Because feminism is liberal, is liberalism. Feminism is humanism. And when this is expanding to a very conservative communities, such as the community I'm coming from, such as myself, that's a big hope, I think, because it means it's not really liberal versus conservative. And you have people who believe in liberal values within conservative communities. That's a starting.
Actually, I see two places of hope. One, the fact that this topic is being discussed in this kind of a place, in logical and in empathetic terms, and not in screaming language. And I think that the more institutions like the Hartman Institute that really take the bull with its horns and deals with the issue with its real problematic nature, I think that's hopeful. It's not over. So yes, I did say that the cloud has made landfall, but there are still capacities on the ground that are trying to lift that cloud. The second actually connects with something I was sharing with Zach Rinat. Is he here? He's not here. Okay. Yesterday, Orly introduced me to Zach Rinat, who we were together on a Tiyul. We sat next to each other on the bus. And he asked, we started talking small talk, and he asked me about my kids, and I told him about my daughter who's doing her master's degree in genetics at the medical school in Tel Aviv University. And that she is in some kind of a stage that she's not sure whether to go for PhD program in genetics or to go to genetic counseling. And he said, oh, my sister has a PhD postdoc in genetics, and she has a business in genetic counseling. And within hours, we were already making e-introductions between my daughter and his sister, and they're planning to meet. This is where my hope comes from those kind of what I call small islands of success that are filled with people with good intentions, back to your word, and people that have the right mechanism and have the right heart. And if we put our energy into partnerships, that's where we can create those islands, but those islands have to have magnitude, have to have scale. We need to create critical mass of successes. And it's not enough just to be satisfied and tap ourselves on the shoulder with a group of Jewish and Arab kids that come to Givat Chaviva for a nice workshop on flying kites, what we call hummus coexistence. We want mass scale, large scale partnerships between Jews and Arabs. We have the majority in both sides that want that. The question is, can we channel them into action and not just believing? Thank you.
Thank you so much to Mohammad and Tehila. And I hope those of you who still have questions will join them for lunch.